Hi everyone, my name is Elon. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm one of the Sunset Writers this year. Thank you all for coming to our third event in our spring reading series, and I'm super excited to pass it over to Edward to introduce you all to Hala Alyan.
Hi everyone. I hope y'all are doing well. Thank you so much for coming out. Thanks, Elon. I appreciate it. On campus, I feel blessed because we just saw Evie Shockley. Evie Shockley I was at a reading literally an hour and a half ago, and now we get this. So it's like literally Christmas. All the holidays at once. I swear. But yeah, I'm just so honored to be doing this introduction right now. I'm going to keep it short because I know we all are here for this. You know what I mean? So, but I just want to, this is kind of like the story I want to frame this with. I'm the editor, head press editor of Stephanie Chang's book. And our first ever meeting about the book, I brought two poems just kind of as like, to kind of think about poetry together and begin this process. And both the two poems were Spoiler and Half-Life and Exile. And I guess I walked into that conversation just kind of, I think there's a lot always when we're thinking about books and there's a lot of pressure. And I wanted Steph to just feel like they didn't have to figure it out all at that moment and at once. And that's what those poems did for me. And kind of even when you're on like a big stage, like figuring that out. So thank you so much. Hala Alyan, everyone.
Thank you so much, Edward. And Eve, oh my God, that's amazing. Thank you for that intro. Thank you, Lon. Thank you, Virginia and Sunset Press. Thank you all for coming, for everyone that came, and for having me here today. So we had our daughter was born 2 weeks and 2 days ago. So I'm a little sleep deprived. I'm a little disoriented, but I'm so excited to be speaking with adults, like actually having a conversation, even though it's mostly just me talking, but I'll take it. I thought for today, what I would do is do a little bit of different genres because it's kind of true to what I've been doing, especially the last few years. So I thought I would start off reading like a few-minute excerpt from my last novel. And then I'm going to read something I've actually never read aloud before. It's like a micro essay in this nonfiction book that I'm working on. And then I have some poems. So the excerpt from the novel Arsonist City is, I guess, the background info that you would need is that it's about a family that's sort of like scattered around the world that goes back to Beirut over the course of the summer to try to stop their ancestral home from being sold. And so it's like 2 parents and 3 adult children. And the youngest of those children is named Naj. She's the only one of sort of like the Americanized children that ended up moving to Beirut, where she's a very successful musician, and she's queer, and she's sort of like put an ocean between her and her family kind of intentionally because she's not out to them. And this is her after waking up after like a one night stand and a night of partying and kind of walking back to her place in Beirut. At this hour, the city has a narcotic effect. Ambient noise drifts from the passing cabs, a French song, the sound of a man coughing, and the few people on the street share a certain camaraderie, nodding and smiling wryly at each other. Beirut is an insomniac city, unfocused, filled with half-finished buildings and impromptu crowds. There has been a high-rise under construction on Naj's block since she moved there 11 years ago. The newer houses live dissonantly among the older plain ones. The city doesn't change from neighborhood to neighborhood as much as building to building, and Naj is tired of remembering the former incarnations of places. How the spa was once a fabric store, the health food market was once filled with antiques and toys. It is a tiresome nostalgia to live here. Her own apartment building is similarly disjointed. The glass entrance has been cracked since December, but there's a stupidly ornate chandelier in the lobby, refracting light on guests like confetti. The elevator hasn't worked in months. Abu Nabil, the building's cranky middle-aged super, lives in a small room next to the stairs. Someone decided to paint the stairwell a modern dark red, but then apparently changed his mind 2 floors up, where the walls suddenly become beige. Each floor has 2 apartments, and Naj likes her neighbors, an elderly pair of widowed sisters who go out every Sunday in matching dresses and honest-to-God church hats. There's a hand-painted sign on Naj's front door that reads, "Abandon all blank, you who enter here." The space left intentionally bare for people to scrawl in things like Wi-Fi and bras. The sisters have never complained. Naj's apartment smells stale, like something yeasty left out too long with undertones of weed, even though she hasn't smoked in days. Near the window, an assortment of plants droop in various stages of dying. She always forgets about them. 1 second, she promises them, then trots to the kitchen and fills a mug. She goes from plant to plant, cocaine still buzzing in her blood, watering the dusty soil. "You get water, you get water, you get water," she sings out Oprah-like. The water bubbles in the soil, then starts to drip onto the windowsill underneath. The plants remind her of her mother, of the swampy smell she'd bring home with her after a day at the greenhouse. The apartment is a 3-bedroom, too large for her, but over the years, the rooms have filled of their own volition with guitars and clothes and hosted a succession of friends who'd left their exes. The electricity cuts off most afternoons, not enough electricity generated to meet the country's needs, and the balcony rail squeaks anytime someone leans on it. The water runs hot for only a few minutes, but she loves it. And more than that, she loves the idea of herself as loyal to modest living. The apartment represents her restraint. She could buy in one of the high rises, but she doesn't. Her band's ethos is folksy. Naj had once been called the proletariat's duchess on the cover of a European music magazine. The amount of money in her Crédit Libanais account embarrasses her. Her father was furious when she bought the apartment. She was only 24, flush from the surprising success of their first album, Proposal. It hadn't reached the United States, but sold surprisingly well in Europe, taking off like a rocket in random cities, Amman, Kosovo, Athens, Riyadh. But the audiences seemed to have in common, used the Guardian article she taped to the refrigerator, are places of censorship, corruption, oppression. The musical duo Noja, fronted by Naj, nay Najla Nasser, creates an album of defiance with guttural lyrics, powerhouse performances, and most compellingly, a mixture of Arabic and English lyrics, so the listener might often be unsure of what is being said, but happy to sing along. "This is stupid, Baba," her father had thundered on the phone. "Stupid. First, you say you want to study in Beirut. Stupid number 1. Then you say, Baba, I can't live with Jadot, even though he is your grandfather. Stupid number 2. But okay, I pay for rent for an apartment 5 minutes away from our family house. Then, stupid number 3, you make some money from your little band. Okay, great. Instead of saving or investing, you want to buy an apartment in Beirut. Baba, for what? For what? Stupid number 4. I thought that was stupid number 3, mocked Naj. The little band had heard. Baba, her father continued, it's like a saying we have in Arabic. Oh God, Naj grumbled. Her father had an irredeemable habit of quoting Arabic sayings in English. A single mistake ensures a double misfortune. Baba, Naj interrupted, I get it. Okay, I'm making a mistake. A stupid mistake, he corrected. A stupid mistake, fine. Except I don't think so. I don't have to pay the same taxes here. My friend Jo knows a good real estate agent. It's going to be great. Can't you try to be happy for me? Just practice. She's the only one that can get away with talking to her father like this, a symptom of being the youngest. It's not that hard. Naj, congratulations, she says. Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Baba. Come on, your turn. Her father had just shaken his head. A double misfortune, he repeated. Okay. So I'm going to read a little micro. Again, these are like, I don't know what this is. So I sold this nonfiction book on a partial, and which is great because it means I get to work with an editor and figure out what it's going to be. But the not great part is that I have no idea what it's going to be. And it's just sort of these like, it started off with like essays, and then it was going to be this different form. And now it's kind of turning into these like micro essays. I feel very confident about it, if you can tell. So the way that it's been structured so far is that like the heading or the title of each one is sort of like the exile. So like the exile stops eating, the exile picks up a bottle, the exile, whatever. And this is the exile's memo to her 19-year-old self. He's an asshole, but so are you. Sit down. Take that ridiculous eyeliner off. He's an asshole and you're the first tectonic plate of his life. Don't lie to him about your virginity. Please, please. You already did. This isn't a poem. That's your ribcage. That bruise flowering on the side of your thigh isn't art. It's your red blood cells leaking. I'm sorry. I'm not mad. Sit down. There's a morning coming and you need not to drink in it. Can you do that? Can you take the second bus to Tripoli? It's dirtier, but you won't find yourself tripping down the cobbled streets, stumbling towards actually, better yet, can you miss the bus? Can you miss your third semester of college? Can you go to your grandmother's apartment and stay there just for a week, just for the rest of the year? Can you stand next to that radiator and interrupt your Turkish soap opera with questions? Can you ask Jiddo to turn the radio down? Can you ask him what his favorite Darwish poem is, please? No, I'm sorry. Don't be upset. Of course, they're still alive. Nobody ever dies in the future. Nobody ever leaves. Yes, I'm still in Beirut. Calm down. I can drive to the house above the pharmacy anytime I want. The borders are open. The city is fine. It's fine. Hala, it's fine. Look, I got her tattooed on my wrist here. See, I'm not avoiding your eyes. I'm not avoiding your questions. Could you answer one for me? What does the Adan sound like? Is it more mosquito or song? Have you started using the sage shampoo yet? You don't hate sage. Don't be ridiculous. Stop fidgeting. Stop picking at your days like a sunburn. You won't get any of this back. I'm sorry. Sit down. It feels faded because it is. The police station and his threats and the chlorine water of that Doha swimming pool. Your mother loves you. Your mother is afraid of you. When he tells you to shut up, don't wade in seawater hours later to kiss him. When a friend shows up at midnight with a taxi, don't tell him to mind his business. Make yourself your business. Get in the back seat. Change your number. Change your father's number. Pay attention to the story you're telling. You're going to be stapled to it for decades. I know you already kissed me, Miss Palm. Kiss it again. Tell her you're sorry. Don't ask what for. Tell her. Sit down. I'll tell you a secret. In 16 years, you'll have a dream where he is your husband and your husband is leaving you and you are back in Beirut and every sparrow that ever lived within you during those years is back in flight. They were asleep, it turns out, this whole time, not vanished. Sit down. And Hala, it will be the biggest relapse dream of all. Since we're on like a Beirut kick, I'm gonna read this poem next. It's called Time Travelers. I wrote it right after the port explosion last August, well, 2 August ago. Time Travelers. It's not going back, not exactly, but more that we never left, that we are still sprawled on that grass or giggling into each other's shoulders in the last booth, our thighs sticky against the torn leather. This is the answer to nostalgia, and I must get back to them. Twirling in our girl bodies, me bending over to touch my toes. Is this skirt too short, spilling, then licking the vodka that tastes of nectarines? I don't know what makes youth. A fifth of Bailey's, a pretty hand on your ass, a record that skips and the goddamn song still makes you cry. Look where it gets you, this youth. Bad posture. Taxi ride to the ER for a bag of IV, to his floor again, his band show again, his fist. Years later, I'll read about the observer effect, in which the act of observing a phenomena changes the phenomena, and wonder if my watching changes me, if my remembering the ports unburns them. I try to forget, and that only makes it worse. Like it's still Sunday morning and we're hungover and never alone, curled into each other like clocks, watching Americans pretend to love each other on the television. In the end, we'd leave the city, and in the end, we would stop coming back. In our absence, it hoovers the bars and marina and roads like an infant disappears in peekaboo. The entire world vanished under 2 hands, and I do not call them, not even after her father dies, or after the other one's surgery, or when the city plunges like a heart and they are silent back, a gift we give each other like only those who know what's gone is gone can give. Little shift in tone, that's fine. This is called Portrait of His Ex as Eve. It ended. Do you remember how? It wasn't the oversized sunglasses or the zipline kissing jungle knee. I'll open again. This time a blue island, the hook of a rose thistle. I've already shut your city like a door. But this isn't about me. You're the magic trick here. Over oysters, he calls you simple, never paradise, never a thank you for all that mouth, sweetie. Can I call you sweetie? Can I call you on a landline? This morning, the fruit came in, red, delicious, pink lady, comely as a first bleed. Can we drop the pretense? I can't hear you over all that good intention, predecessor, 2-for-1 white girl, your vocal fry, your unaccented mother. I didn't cause that hurricane, but I could have. Did you already have the fig picked out? A neon bikini, crystals from Ojai. Too bad about the balcony. Too bad about the pesky marriage. Come on, show me a little rib cage. Show me that shoebox heart of yours. Don't be shy. I was trying your name on for size. I was trying to keep the chlorine out of your eyes. I read your text. I'm sorry. I've always loved a good pawn shop. There's no loyalty that doesn't become colony. Blue flags and weedy borders. And when he called you bait, what he meant is he invented you. What he meant is we are nothing but logos to him, our arms outstretched towards red. You misunderstand me. I don't care about the snake or the seeds. Keep your word or don't. I'm not God. It's the same rule here it's always been. Whatever you catch, you can keep. All right, this is called naturalized. Do I want to read? Yeah. Sorry. Hey, when people in the readings like have existential crises in real time in front of you, and you're like, why did you not prepare? All right, naturalized. Can I pull the land from me like a cork? I leak all over brunch. My father never learned to swim. I won't say where he was born. I've already said too much. Look, the Gardenians are coming in. Look, my love is watching Vice again. Gloss and sound bites. He likes to understand. He likes to play devil's advocate. My father plays soccer. It's so hot in Gaza. It's so hot under that hospital elevator. That's no place for a child's braid. In the staff meeting, I stretch my teeth into a country when they congratulate me on the ceasefire, as though I don't take a jazeera to the bath, as though I don't pray in broken Arabic. It's okay. They like me. They like me in a coffin. They like me when I spit my father from my mouth. There's a whistle. There's a missile fist bumping the earth. I draw a Pantene map on the shower curtain. I break a Klonopin with my teeth and swim. The newspaper says truce and Seymour is selling peaches again, woolly in my palms. And I have marched on the streets too few times, ruined too few dinner parties with my politics. Sundays are tarot days. Tuesdays are for tacos. Even the worst days only last hours. No leaflet of death. There's a leak in the bathroom and I get it fixed in 30 minutes flat. I stop jogging when I'm tired. I stop talking when I'm bored. Nothing can justify why I'm alive and they're not. Why there's still a June. Why I wake up and wake up and wake up, and the earth still doesn't shake. The interviewer wants to know about fashion. Think of all the calla lilies. Think of all the words that rhyme with calla. Isn't it a miracle they come back? The flowers, the dead. I watch a woman bury her child. How I lost a fetus and couldn't eat breakfast for a week. I watch a woman and the watching is a crime, so I return my eyes. The sea foams like a dog. What's 5,000 miles between friends? If you listen close enough, you can hear the earth crack like a neck be lucky. Try to make it to the morning. Try to find your heart in the newsprint, please. I'd rather be alive than holy. I don't have time to write about the soul. There are bodies to count. There's a man who wore his tuxedo to sleep in case he meets God. And there's a brick of light before each bombing. I dream I am a snake after all. I dream I do Jerusalem all over again, only this time I don't shake my hair down when the soldier tells me to. I don't thank them for my passport. Later, my grandfather said they couldn't have kept it. You know that, right? I don't know what they couldn't do. I only know that enormous light. Only that roar of nothing, as certain and incorrect as a sermon. Where is, I'm asking y'all like you're gonna know. I was gonna read Half-Life and I can't, ever since you mentioned it, I was like, where is Half-Life? 1 second, I know I'm being obnoxious. Half-Life. Where would it be? Well, actually, I know where it is. Oh, I know where I can find it. Um, Half-Life in Exile. I'm forever living between Aprils. The air here smells of jacarandas and lime, and it's sunset before I know it. I'm supposed to rest, but that's where the children live. In the hot mist of sleep, dream after dream, instead I obsess. Draw stars on receipt, everybody loves the poem. It's embroidered on a pillow in Milwaukee. It's done nothing for Palestine. There are plants out west that emerge only after fires. They listen for smoke. I wrote that poem after weeks of despair, hauling myself like a rock. Everyone loves home. The plants are called fire followers, but sometimes it's after the rains. At night, I'm a zombie feeding on the comments. Is it compulsive to watch videos? Is it compulsive to memorize names? Rafif and Ahmad and Mahmoud, poppies and snapdragons and calendrinias. I can't hear you. I can't hear you under the missiles. A plant waits for fire to grow. A child waits for a siren. It must be a child, never a man without a child. There's nothing more terrible than waiting for the terrible, I promise. Was the grief worth the poem? No. But you don't interrogate a weed for what it's done with wreckage, for what it's done to get here. Read maybe one or two more. Okay. This is called After I'd Aspedan, which is the name of the village that my father was from that was eradicated in 48 in Palestine. I'm not sure you'd want what I've stolen. I'm not sure I say your name right. I forgot about you with my mouth full of cake, my scales, my husband, my fingertips smelling of weed. I know you're in there somewhere. Should I have poured rose tea instead? Whiskey? What's the trine of planets in the sky? Where can I find your intestines? Can you believe the apple trees this year? Pink as slaughter, perfect for a photo shoot. Today I cut calories, but at night I eat worms. I won't say what I paid for this mattress. You can't put a price on good sleep. You can't put a corpse back together. One bomb dives into the sky like a rose. And if I don't say rose, you'll skip ahead to the end. I think I'm in love with the murdered poet. I think I shouldn't say that. His voice reminds me of strawberries, red and sour at the farmer's market in Brooklyn this morning, virgin mojitos afterwards. The physical therapist says my serratus is tight. The prime minister says that high-rise has bad posture. Who sweeps the glass? Who rakes the graves like an itch? The screens will spoil my eyesight. After all that LASIK, after all that shelling, a mother walks her child over rubble. Praise, praise, praise. The young will forget. All right, I'm gonna read one more. This is called The Dead Co-Author This Poem. The dead say start at the beginning. I won't say what the beginning is. So I start with the apology, start with the gardenia, with everything that reminds me of August. The graffiti on the sidewalk the other day that said, do you remember? And for a second I was back in Beirut and he was still alive in that rundown hotel room where the housekeeper walked in on us and looked. Even the dead want you to laugh. Even the dead want you to take it easy. This is how I think of heaven. Not the end of a race, but a fountain in a square somewhere. No meeting time, no running late. You just show up when you show up and someone is already singing your favorite song. And someone is telling you to sit. And it's whatever season you want it to be. And it's whatever city you want it to be. And the dead say start this very moon. Say enough with the homesickness. How much more of your life are you going to miss? And it's true. The dead don't want to be turned into saints. But first, please let me tell you one last story about Fatma. How when she prayed, she would say, only make me grateful. So make me grateful. The dead want me to cite my sources. So I got these chemicals from my father, got these nerves from my mother. Don't ask me where I got all this want. It'll kill me. This want, these hands made of other hands, made at the knees of Thoth and made of Thoth, they make me grateful. The dead don't need your address. They don't need your permission. They are brewing your favorite drink as we speak, and it doesn't matter. When you arrive, they've got time. We're not time like we have time, but time like a country. No start or end or middle. The dead don't own clocks. They own nothing. And the best part is they don't just love people, the dead. They love creeks and sand and the sound of rain on tin. They love DMV lines and mosquitoes and terrible customer service. And the dead want you to love too. The dead want you to love like your life depends on it, like it's the last thing you'll do, the kind of love that drags you out of bed in the morning, sometimes with tea, sometimes by your hair, and it doesn't matter. You got up, didn't you? You got here, didn't you? The dead want you to know how the summer air feels on your ankles right this very second. Want to know if the crab apples came in this year. When they're not at the Fountain Square, the dead live on 23rd Street or the Pacific or your ex's luxury building in Cairo, you see the dead aren't dead at all. And they don't care if you forget them. They have enough memory for all of us. The dead would like to remind you that you are not your wallet, not your Apple ID password, your wedding ring. You are not your pancreas, your vision board, your left-in wisdom tooth. You're not your nickname or your worst impulse or the month you put her in the ground. The dead would like to know what you tell yourself about tomorrow. Want to know how many times you have started over, like what's one more time, like maybe there's nothing to save, like maybe the saving already happened. Did you ever think that? The dead say I should probably stop listening to them. Say it's starting to get a little creepy. They say the living have things to say too, like when Johnny said, cheer up, said it's just life. Or when Baba says sometimes he can almost believe in a God if he holds still enough. If I hold still enough, I am almost the exact size of my love when I hear my mother call her mother's name. Or when Miriam cuts her new year out of a magazine, and yes, later she crumples it, but you know what? Even later she smooths it back out, and morning comes, and Bilal and I speak again, and my friend falls in love again, and my other friend decides to stay, and I want everyone where I can see them, safe and dry and alive for 200 years. And it is so tiresome sometimes, isn't it? This trying, this turn and turn and turn. But look, even the dead want you to live. Even the dead are rooting for you. And maybe there is no homesick. And maybe there is no fountain. And maybe there is no river I have to cross, no way to save them, but to love them like time itself, to love them like there is no time outside of it. And that's something. I mean, something. I mean, everything, isn't it? That's it, friends. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. It was like, especially the micro essay. Just like, yeah, wonderful. And if people, we'll start the Q&A now. So people want to, start sending in questions. You can either in the chat, you raise your hand and speak, turn on your camera. But while people start doing that, I guess, since I already brought it up, and you read Half-Life, I don't know, I am fascinated by, I guess, like the fact that they came out like, on the same day, like a year later. And so I don't know, I don't really have a question. I just kind of want to hear about like that process and like how that felt for you. And especially like, what did that look like editorially, I guess, for New Yorker? And yeah.
They come out on the same day?
Yeah. You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah.
No, I knew it came out around this. Oh, that makes
yeah, like
so
one day.
Oh my God. You know what is funny about that is that I remember feeling this really intense deja vu because I knew it was September. I knew it was like the same time-ish, but I remember being like, God, this feels like such a similar experience. That's wild. That explains.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's my answer.
You're telling, well, that was your answer. It's funny because that the poem that I'm referencing in Half-Life is spoiler, and I like, which I think, and it was a very it's very serendipitous and amazing, and like I didn't think that it would happen, that the New Yorker would accept this in the poem that's sort of written, it's like a meta poem about the experience of getting a poem in the New Yorker and then sort of being like, because I think one of the things that happened with that piece was that it came out very soon after the port explosion in 2020 in Beirut. And it wasn't about that, but it was about spoiler. But it was this time where I was just sort of like, what am I doing? What's the value? What am I contributing? And then this poem came out, and I think for me, the New Yorker was like a publication that I was like, oh my gosh, will I, like, if I ever get this, it's gonna, you know how like everyone has these benchmarks of like, if this thing happens, then everything's gonna be perfect. And then I'm never gonna be unhappy. So it was like one of my benchmarks where I was like, oh, if that were to happen, like how could someone with a poem in the New Yorker not feel thrilled all the time? Which is very, very silly to say, but it was one of my markers. It was one of my like things that I was like, was like hoping someday would happen. And then it happened, and it was, don't get me wrong, wonderful, opened a bunch of doors, as a lot of these sort of like systemic things where like an institution holds a lot of power. There were opportunities that came from that, but there was it was a confusing experience, because I think it came out, and I remember just sort of being like, what has this actually done for anything in the world, materially or concretely, except like giving me an ego boost? So it's just very funny, because a few months later I was having a really dark time, the half-life, and then ended up sending it to the New York. And so when it came out, I was like, oh, that's so funny. This is like such a like lovely meta, like little Russian doll of an experience.
Yeah. Wow. That's
it's wild
yeah.
that I didn't realize it came out on the same day.
Yeah, and I guess that immediately, but maybe I just like to read those poems like every week, because it's like, I don't know, they're always coming
totally.
out.
Same. Yeah.
So yeah, that's amazing though. And I guess people aren't always like open or honest about what these institutions, like what it feels like to be published by the institutions, and that's what I found the most moving, I think. Like
I
that
think,
just
it's very interesting, because it's like, I can tell you the part that felt the best about it is that it felt like I reached across time and space and gave my like 21-year-old self a high five, because that's when I moved to New York from Beirut when I was 21. I just turned 22. And like, that became a rich, because there weren't like, I didn't have access to like magazines or anything like that, Beirut, or at least the ones that I would have been reading. And I would get the New Yorker. It was like this splurge, because I really didn't have the money for it, but I would like buy it and immediately just go to the poems. Like that was the main thing that I was. And so there was like this ritual that I had around like the New Yorker and the poems that would come out, and like how much I felt like, oh, this is like me as a writer sitting on the subway reading a poem in the New Yorker, like. So I think the most satisfying part of it was that it felt like closing a loop with a former version of myself that I know would have been like beyond thrilled, and so then I was thrilled on her behalf.
Yeah. Any questions trickling in? Yeah, Elon.
Hi, Hala. It's so incredible to be able to speak with you. I'm a huge fan of your work across genres. I forced everyone in my family to read Salt Houses, and they all loved it.
Did you really? I love it.
And yeah, because like you write in so many genres, I wanted to ask you about just trying to think of how to word this, but yeah, about like how a certain idea fits into a certain genre, because I think, and I'm more familiar with your poetry and your novels than your nonfiction, so I think it's striking to me because both of your novels to me feel very like lyrical and poetic, and then also your poems have a certain element of, I think, like they're very often maybe not narrative based, but often like very character and place based. So I was just wondering how when an idea comes to you, do you immediately know like, oh, this is going to be part of a fiction piece or an essay, or this is a poem? And well, I guess another way to ask this question would be like, what do you think being a poet, like, how do you think that contributes to how you write fiction and vice versa?
I think they're like, I think I like both questions. Not that you need me to tell you I like your question, but I'm looking for an answer. So I think and they are very connected. So for me, I feel like the content starts to dictate the form for me, not the other way around. So I will Well, that's not fully true. Sometimes I'll do like poem swap months with friends where like we'll send each other a poem every month just to like generate new work. And so in that case, the form is dictating the content because I know I'm going to be writing a poem, right? But usually it's not quite as like contrived as that. Usually there's something that's nagging at me. There's like a dream I had, or like an image, or a stray piece of a dialogue, or just something that I'm like, I really want to get that on a feeling. I want to get it on the page. So I will usually just start free writing. Very rarely do I know immediately, like this has to be a micro essay, this has to be a poem, this has to be a whatever. I'll usually just start writing. And I think that is a freedom that comes with working in different genres, is that I don't feel constrained by any one of them. I feel like I know that I can move. It's sort of like having a passport to 3 different countries. And I know I can kind of move across the borders of all 3 of them relatively easily. And so what I'll usually do is just start writing, and then it'll tell me what it wants to be. So I'll sort of pick at random. Okay, I'm going to do a free form. I'm going to do something more prosy. I'm going to try to, create stanzas out of this. But you'll know, like, it'll, like, if I sit down and try to write a novel about an idea I had, and I'm running out of steam after 3 paragraphs, that might have been a poem. Or it might have been nothing. You know what I mean? Like it might have wanted a very different format. And similarly, I have tried. There was an idea that I actually saw how this was that. Like it was a short story. It started as a short story about a character, about like a man in 67 or maybe pre-67, no, pre-67. And then I was like, I'm like obsessed with this person's sister and their mother and like this house. And I know the 6-day war is coming, and they don't know that. And I can't just abandon them now. And I started writing backwards and forwards. And so became very invested in the story. So I think for me, content usually nudges me, and then how hooked I get on something and how much I find myself wanting to keep telling it will usually do it. I think that to the other question, I think that being a poet, I think they both serve me really well. Like I think prose has, it's funny, prose is actually like, I think poetry has taught me a conciseness and an ability to work with sort of like space or whatever constraints in a way that has made my prose less wordy and less like flowery. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but that's definitely what I tend towards flowery, right? I veer towards flowery, I veer towards very, more like character driven stuff, more descriptive stuff, more. And I think that can, after a while, get a little bit suffocating for a reader, because it's like there's only so many adjectives. I remember one of the first readers that I had was like, I want you to go through and take out half the adjectives, and then I want you to take out another half the adjectives. And she's like, there'd be no adjectives left in this novel, because it was just like I was bringing in poet sensibility to that. And so I think that there's something about learning to work with conciseness that I think has served both, or all 3 genres, I guess you could say. And then vice versa, because I think like writing prose means that you have to pay attention to, you kind of have to know what to do with the tension in both. Like you have to know how to hold attention, where to put it, when to move away from it, like how to, like it's like clay, and you have to figure out where to work with it. Like how much dialogue am I going to do here? How long is the stanza going to be? Is this beat too long? Is it like there's a musicality in both that I think like they feel very complementary to me. And the last thing I'll say is that I think being a poet means I pay attention to like musicality and rhythm. And so like even the prose tends to have like a certain, like when I read it aloud, it will usually like be easy to read aloud because there is like an invisible beat that I'm sort of following when I write in general.
Did it start for you that way? Do you find, or like, did you start in one genre or?
Oh, I see what you mean. I wrote, I started writing when I learned English. So like when I learned how to read, and like I would write these little stories. I think I wrote stories for, I was like, I always had like a novel I was working on from age like 7. And then I think the first poem I wrote was in like, was like 13 or something. And there was like we did like a poetry unit in the lit class, and like, she had us put together like a little portfolio, and I took it very seriously. I found it recently, and I use like different fonts for the different poems. And I'm like really aggressive about rhyming, and like, it's a lot. And I remember then being like, oh, this is so fun. This is like another thing that I can do. I think my teen years were marked by a lot more poetry, because again, I think that the content was very like angsty and angry, and like, you know, there's a lot that I was trying to process, and I think like that lent itself more toward confessional poetry than it did towards like fiction or writing like long form essays or whatever. But then I published in poetry first. Like poetry was the thing that, like, I came to New York and I started doing like open mics and a little bit of slam, and just like that was my foray into, like, I met a publisher at an open mic reading. So like that was how I first got my feet wet in publishing. And so by the time I published fiction, I already had like, I think 3 books out of poetry, which are 2 very different experiences publishing this. But I had been writing prose, I guess, for longer, but it was just poetry was the thing that the doors opened for first.
Let's see. Here, I can read this out for you, Virginia. I'm really fascinated by your overlapping career paths of writer and clinical psychologist. Could you share a bit about how you balance both of these worlds on a day-to-day basis, or how these practices feed each other more broadly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they also feel very complementary, similar to the working in different genres. Like I think the better I become as a therapist, the better I become as a writer, and vice versa. So I think like it's not a coincidence I wanted to become a clinical side. Like I've always been sort of an eavesdropper and like a people watcher and somebody that's like interested in people's lives and kind of nosy. And I've also always been fascinated with story and with narrative. And that is really the work of a therapist, right? You're working with like the currency you work with in both. Like I say, it's like it's the currency is narrative in both of them. And there's a similar process to, I don't know if y'all like, if any of y'all have like been putting together a collection of, well, Edward, you're talking about working on this book. So it's like putting together a collection of poetry or writing a novel, you start out with these what feel like these fragmented pieces. It's sort of like a big jigsaw puzzle. And you're like, well, what am I going to make of this? How am I going to make a coherent whole out of these pieces? Very similar to therapy, right? People come in, they don't come in and say, look, I'm doing this in my relationship. Well, sometimes they do if they've been in therapy before, or if they've like, you know, done a lot of reading or work or whatever on themselves. Like, but usually people don't come in and provide like a linear, like kind of like this happens because of that, and then that happens because of that thing. And that like people come in and they're just like, I don't know why, but I feel hollow in relationships. I can't connect. I don't know what it is, right? You know? Or like I fall in love with people, then I start hating them after 5 months. Help me fix it. Help me figure it out. And so then you're working with these like fragments that people give you, you know, and you're working. You go to the past. You think, you know, you're kind of putting it together. You're stitching it together to try to co-create with the client like a narrative that makes sense. And so there's this stitching together in both of them that I think is very similar. And then I think logistically, like in terms of concrete things, like training as a therapist has you asking, or like teaches you and trains you to ask certain questions of your clients, to think about intention, to think about incentive, desire, motivation. Why do people do things that seem to be really self-defeating or self-sabotaging? So then you can apply those questions for characters who do things that seem incomprehensible, and create characters that seem really true to form, right? Like and feel realistic.
Were those like budding at the same time, or in terms of career wise, like, or did you know, I guess, in terms of that they were gonna, I guess, build on each other?
So I wrote, no, I mean, I wrote since I was like 6, right? So like the therapy, obviously, like clinical psychology came way later. Like I knew I was gonna be a therapist when I was, so that would be fascinating. So I wrote always, and then, or like since I kind of came online, so to speak, in terms of memory, and then I think that so I don't think, let me put it this way, I don't think it's a coincidence that I started working on the novel as I was getting my training to be a clinical psychologist. Like I think there was something about starting to think about people in a different way and starting to ask different questions of like why things happened and the psychology of things and psychology of nations and the psychology, you know, like all of that helped me feel confident enough to start to write a novel. Like I do think those things definitely were intertwined.
We got another question in the
Oh, I
chat.
see it.
Yeah, how has your experience differed in publishing poetry, or how has your experience differed in publishing poetry and fiction in terms of their scope and scale in the wider contemporary literary world? Did you feel like more was at stake for one over the other?
That's such a good question. I love that question. What I would say to that is I felt like other people felt like there was more at stake because they give you different kinds of money for them, in that they give you no money for poetry. Right? That's very different. In that, like, you don't, I mean, I was never, I guess I won the crab orchard thing for the third book. And so I got so I got prize money for that, which was like unheard of and a delight and huge. But that was pretty much it. Right? Like everything else was, you don't, there's not a lot of money for, I feel really bad saying this to a room full of potential poets because I don't actually know what the demographics are here, but like I'll put it this way. There are resources aside from financial that are important in the world, while also acknowledging that financial resources are important to survive. So there are things that being a poet that have given me that are like indescribable and have nothing to do with finances. But I do think you get an advance for fiction that is a very different scale. And so the expectation of other people on you and the stakes for other people that have, for all intents and purposes, invested in you, like that's what a publisher does. If they give you an advance, they're investing in you, they're staking a claim in you and your book and your story and your ability to go into the world and do interviews and whatever, in a different way. And so I think that I felt it. I don't think internally I was like, oh, I have a novel, and so the novel is worth more than this poetry collection. I don't feel that way as a writer. I don't feel that way as a reader, right? Like my life has been equally saved by poetry collections and nonfiction books and poetry and novels. But I think I felt like the pressure of an audience and of like publicists and publishers and whatever, even if nobody was directly saying that, obviously, but that felt different to me. Like it's just it's different when money gets involved. It really is. The other thing I'll say is also you tend to have more, I don't know what y'all's experiences at Sunset Press, but like I think as a poet, like, the smaller the press, the more collaborative the process feels, and the more it feels like you actually. This is why I fucking love the small presses, because like independent presses, because like I think you actually are co-create, like you've written. I remember a friend of mine's always like, you have a bunch of different books. The same book is a bunch of books, right? It's the book in your mind before you write it. It's the book when you have the draft yourself, and there's a different book that's in the hands of another person that you're editing. And then once it's in the hands of readers, it's a completely different book, right? I feel like those books feel more, there feels to be more of a through line and more coherence when in working with smaller presses. Whereas again, a bigger press cut to a bigger check, and then it's sort of like, here are the places you show up, here are the readings you do, here are the interviews you do. And I've only had, honestly, but I haven't had any negative experiences with presses, which is, knock on wood, and I think unusual because I've worked with a few of them, but it is there's an intimacy with the small presses that is different when you're working with a larger corporation.
Yeah, our process is exactly like that. We have we have press editors for each book, and then we have basically like a workshop group that's like three
yes.
to maybe 6 people.
Yes.
So it's completely like collaborative in that way.
I love that. I love that.
Payson, did you have a question? I saw you turn your camera on. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
turn that camera back on, Payson.
Sorry, I'm like in and out of. I'm very aware of being on recorded while also being very thirsty. But my question, I guess, I feel like I was kind of hesitating because I feel as though I know the answer to it, but do you kind of find yourself, whether in like whatever form of writing that you do, leaning towards kind of when you're first just like throwing out an idea onto paper, if there's like a specific like language that you lean more towards? Because that's something that I'm kind of always aware of in my own writing, of like what language I'm leaning towards when I'm just randomly jotting down poems. It's okay.
I missed you froze for a second, the middle part. Say that again.
It's okay. Just me and my technical difficulties. I was just wondering if there was kind of like, when you're just jotting down ideas, if you find yourself leaning more towards using one language or the other, because it's something that I know that I kind of catch myself doing a lot, is switching between the two languages.
Like English, Arabic, or?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't write in Arabic. I'm fluent, like spoken, but there's sort of two Arabics. There's like the formal, like what they call Fusha, and then there's like the colloquial spoken. So because we were in it's a long story, but I was like in the Middle East for the first few years of my life. Then my parents saw asylum in the States, then we went back to the Middle East. So by the time we went back to the Middle East, I started studying formal Arabic written when I was like 13. So I have like a grade, second graders like level of that. So while I speak fluently, I wouldn't be able to like write a poem in Arabic, sadly. Yeah. So it doesn't, I wish I did, but I don't know. You're more equipped to answer that question.
Okay, I think I cut it off. I thought I speak Spanish. I don't speak Arabic. I thought you were asking if you were confirming my question, but thank you.
Yeah, no, of course.
We got time for maybe one or two more. So if now's the time for whoever, just ask it. Go ahead. This is a great opportunity. I could go ahead and ask another question if you don't mind. With the 29th year, I guess I feel like that book especially like it's thinking about like all the 29th year, right? It's like about this very specific kind of moment in your life. And I guess I would just love to hear about that's like a massive undertaking. And as we're trying to finish this book, like I guess how did you mold that together, and what was that process like for you, especially when it feels like it's working up towards this moment?
Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm just having a little bit of a situation. I'll be right back. Sorry. Hi, sorry, cameo the baby. sorry.
Whoa.
Sorry about that. My partner just needed to rush to the bathroom. Okay, so the 29th year is an interesting one because I wrote it in this flurry, like a lot of those pieces were written in a flurry in the span of a couple of months when I was 29. And then it was such a emotionally intense time. Like every time I reread them or came towards them for months afterwards, it felt like touching like a burn wound, you know what I mean? Or something that just felt too raw and too active. And it hurt too much. It was too overwhelming. So I had to wait. So I would say I waited about a year before I started to edit these pieces in earnest. And I don't know how you feel about this answer as an editor at a press, but honestly, I'm terrible at structuring poems. Meaning structuring books. I'm terrible at it. And I very much believe in the power of sharing, collaborating, and outsourcing for people, like according to people's strengths. That is not one of mine. So what happened for 29th year is that I got an amazing editor, Jenny at Houghton Mifflin, and she just fucking killed it. Like I get what she took on in terms of a project was like a book that had 4 sections, similar to what ends up being published. But those 4 sections were, I mean, in hindsight, after she did the magic that she did, were like really not, they were kind of incoherent. The pieces were not in dialogue with each other in any significant way. And she didn't change the poems, same poems, the collection ended up having the same pieces. They were not, maybe a couple were cut, but then she said, and this is what I mean by like, everyone, I really believe when it comes to making books, people should let people do the parts they're talented at. And I say this understanding that I can understand the difficulty that some writers have with like, having an editor come in and move around their work, especially if you're someone that's spent years and years and years putting the poems in a particular order, I can understand how precious it feels and how it can feel like a child, right? But for me, there's relief in giving it in like hands that are far more competent than my own. And also, frankly, having somebody be able to see something from a distance and a perspective that I'm too close to the material for, which often happens in poetry, definitely happened in the 29th year because it was so intimate for me, it was so intense. So she just moved it around. She like kind of put together the order. Yeah, she was amazing. Like she completely killed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We have one more question, if that's okay. Yeah. Also, what's their name?
This is Layla Zain. I keep saying it's just Layla, but the middle name Zain. I think as a lot of us Arabs never got middle names. Our middle names are our father's names. So I'm very excited that there's a human that has a name.
All right, last question, then we'll let you get to it. Steph asks, could you envision yourself writing a novel in verse? What are your thoughts on the form?
That is a brilliant, why did I turn off my, that's a brilliant question. I think, I think it, like when I take it in, when I read it, right? Like Safia recently published a novel in verse that was powerful, really, brilliantly fun. And when I read it, I was like, this makes so much sense. This is perfect. There could be no other form for this, right? Than the sort of like hybrid form. I wonder what it would be like for me to do it, because I do think I have created a little bit of a fake demarcation line between genres. I think it's been one of the ways that I figure out, like I'm saying, like the content sort of decides what the form is going to be, et cetera, et cetera. So I do wonder if like it might be too confusing for me to do, but it's definitely something, when you read a book and you're just jealous because it's so good and you're like, I'm going to try that someday. Like, I think her book was so amazing and I read it and I was like, oh, I want to try this someday. So it would be something I'd be very excited to try. And actually it would probably be a good exercise for me to loosen up some of the rigidity I have around what the capital G genre means.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if a book ever comes out, it started here. We know exactly.
It started with Stephanie Chang's question.
Exactly. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Oh my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and for hosting us. Really appreciate it. And thank you for reading and thank you for listening and witnessing. I really appreciate all of your time and attention.
Absolutely. Have a great night. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye. Bye, Layla.
Take care. I was going to